Another day being useless. Look at me. Pathetic. Almost looks like a doo-doo water. If only there is a job so good that I can become a literal god. Huh? What was...
Yeah, buddy. Lightweight.
It's too strong. I can't. Again, thank you for your likes and comments and subscribes on my last 2 FF14 video. I truly appreciate them and thank you immensely. So, you want to be a Dragoon. It is not necessarily the easiest DPS job, however it is easily one of the coolest looking job in Final Fantasy XIV. A class or job that has stayed relatively stable throughout different patches in terms of its damage and pretty high to be honest. So here is a guide for you before you jump the gun and pick up that lance. These tips are ultimately introductory and will touch base with not only the combats but also your life as a Dragoon. But before that, let me give you a quick background story of mine so then you can judge based on my past experience how fitting am I to give you these tips. I completed the main scenario quest with Dragoon alone. That is to say, I have pretty much completed every single dungeons and raids with Dragoon at least once. And I have also completed all of the ultimate raids with Dragoon. With that out of the way, tip number 1. Read your goddamn skill descriptions. This tip goes beyond Dragoon since it can be applied to pretty much every single class in this game. Reading your skill descriptions can help you gain a deeper understanding of your job in the long run at the minimum. For instance, you'll be able to understand why and when to execute certain skills or not to by simply reading your skills descriptions. And on top of that, you will know how to arrange your hotbars based on what each skill can do and what is to follow. This is even more important for more complex jobs such as Dragoon and Monk. Personally speaking, for a long time, I had absolutely no idea that one of Dragoon's rotation can not only provide a damage buff, but can also afflict sustaining damages to the enemy being attacked. Am I dumb? Perhaps. Stupid! Now on to number 2, the longer one. Know your rotation. Since this video is not a rotation guide, I will not go over the specifics of the best rotation as of the most recent patch or patch 6.3. And the reason why I do not wish to make a rotation guide is first, it will make the video too long, and second, only about rotation, and third, because how you may be at varying stages or levels while watching this video, and thus what I'm going to say may simply not make sense to you at this point of time, and the rotation will have to change when completing a certain types of quests. And finally, if you wish an all-level rotation guide of Dragoon, then somebody else has already done an incredible guide on Dragoon's rotation from level 1 to level 90 already. Definitely check him out. What I wish to discuss in this section is the basics, plus a few points that once I learned about became valuable to me. Starting with the basics, essentially Dragoon starts with one set of rotation which evolves into 2 sets of rotations and eventually into 2 interconnected rotations, plus 1 set of rotation that is used against multiple enemies. This is honestly not that bad, but what makes this a bit more complex is how Dragoon also has quite a lot of off-global cooldown skills, for the skills that do not share the same cooldown timer as your main rotation, that a Dragoon needs to weave into the 2 sets of rotation to make the damage as high as possible. And to put the icing on the cake, a Dragoon main will essentially have to learn to double weave off GCDs in order to maximize the damage. What does this mean? Allow me to demonstrate. So in this clip, you see how I weave 1 off GCD in between 2 of my main rotation skills. The damage is alright and my fingers are bored. Now in the second clip, I casted 2 off GCDs in between my main rotation skills or double weaved. This may not seem to be a significant increase in damage, but it adds up really quickly, given how many off GCDs Dragoon has, and it is required when attempting to finish fights or bosses that have a DPS check, or to meet certain amount of damages in a short window. Now don't go into the wild and think every single off GCDs can be double weaved, while most can be. Some Dragoon off GCD cannot be casted within the cooldown from one of the main rotation skill to the other. For instance, this one. You see how as I finish the second off GCD, the next main rotation skill is already ready? What I will say is to test them out in the practice before going into battle and started blasting everything. I've heard people saying that triple weave is also possible but will heavily depend on your internet connection, so I've always stick to double weaving. Ultimately, if you do not feel like you are constantly in action during dungeons or raids and feel like you haven't seen your character touch ground in like 20 minutes, then you are probably playing Dragoon wrong. However, if you wish is to stay chill, which is, perfectly fine, I will recommend just reading your skill description, make sure you can execute the main rotation without any problems, and just add a splash of off GCDs in between them. You may not be the highest damaging Dragoon player, but it will usually not matter that much in normal duties. Third tip, dungeons and raids. Like I said earlier, your rotation will have to change under different circumstances, so do not take what I'm going to say as the golden or the only standard in terms of how to play Dragoon every single time. Always do what is right in the situation, not what will maximize your damage. So starting with dungeons. Usually what I like to do is in the first ad fight, I will use Battle Litany and use Dragon Sight upon myself and the other DPS. And in between my ad clearing rotation, I will use whatever off GCDs I have all for the purpose of clearing faster. Depending on your party clear speed, Battle Litany and Dragon Sight should come back before the boss fight, and during the second ad fight, I will try to reserve upon the longer CD off GCD skills. And I always like to save a Gaze of the First Brood, or the eye symbol on this bar before using it in the dungeon. This bar is charged to the usage of Mirage Dives. With 2 Mirage Dives, Gears Golgum turns into Nastron. Before I use it, especially if I know a boss fight is coming up, I will wait until I have a Mirage Dive ready to go. This will ensure that before your Dragon Gulch run out, another Mirage Dive will be ready and thus allowing the use of the Gaze of the First Brood in successions. In raids, your rotation will change quite drastically, and depending on the raids, you may need to save your off GCDs to a certain point in the fight. I will watch guides before I attempt harder contents, meaning savages or even ultimates, so that I will at least have a sense of when to do what is to save and what is to use before I even start. Finally, the jump button. The skill that characterizes Dragoon, not necessarily in a good way. This skill is a double-edged sword, separating a senior Dragoon and a newbie Dragoon. It can save you in the most critical situation or could give you a most embarrassing death during the fight. And the sad part about the skill is that the only way to really make the most out of it is to repeatedly do a same content and to really learn the fight, since that is pretty much the only way to get a sense of how to push the limit of your DPS with the skill. So do not get dismayed when you use the jump and jump straight into an enemy attack, as I believe the community has gotten used to that at this point. That is not to say that you should be proud or purposefully doing it. Learn from your mistakes and execute it better the next time. Now PvP. Dragoon is actually pretty busted in PvP with crazy damage negations and ability to both engage and disengage in combat. However, the rotation in PvP is quite different from the normal rotation, so again, read your goddamn skill descriptions. You don't have so many buttons to worry about in PvP, but at the same time, precision becomes much more important. A great video covering the rotation is here, and it's also the footages that I'm showing right now. The most important part about Dragoon in PvP is to recognize your role. You are constantly going in and out of combat, and you should not stand in the same spot and tanking everything by yourself. You need to learn to disengage when the situation has become too dire. Dragoon's ult in PvP is both cool looking and extremely potent if used correctly. Essentially, you become untargetable for a few seconds and can crush down when either you press the ult key again or the timer runs out, dealing massive damage when slamming down. I'm not kidding as I say that there was a time when my team in Crystalline Conflict was about to lose, and I sneaked up on the enemy using my ult and quadra killed the enemy team. Dragoon's PvP kit tends to the character well, and you will have fun using Dragoon in PvP once you master the rotation. With all the combat stuff out of the way, we begin the Life of Dragoon part. Tip number 1, the most important one out of everything that I have mentioned thus far. Brooding from a high place. As a Dragoon, it is required that whenever you unlock flying in a new area, you always go to the highest spot on that map and start brooding over everyone. This not only assert your dominance as a Dragoon main, but also ensure the capture of cool screenshots for your wallpapers. You can do this with or without spectators, as long as you accomplish your job as a Dragoon. Then fashion. Dragoon has some of the coolest looking weapons and armors in the game. However, what is sad is that many of those glamours are locked behind grindy or hard or even both contents. For instance, my favorite Dragoon set is Elemental Armor of Maiming +2. Yes, +2 is important, I don't care what you're gonna say. Plus the Heaven Sword Relic final stage. The weapon, not that bad. The armor, don't ask me about that again. Some cool others are the second stage from Shadowbringer Relic, the entire A Realm Reborn Relic series, ultimate weapons, and gears from raids and random dungeons. These will take dedications to get, but the hard works will pay off once you get on top of the peak of the map and start brooding while looking sick. You may be a bit sick like me after all those grindings, but it is a minor consequence to pay for brooding like a badass. Finally, I will briefly touch upon my experience of playing as a Dragoon during the MSQ. Heaven Sword, or the second expansion, is essentially Dragoon's expansion. I felt truly engaged in the story while playing as a Dragoon in Heaven Sword, since you are literally pulling up as a Dragoon in the trailer. After Heaven Sword, it was aight.
Fuck this shit, I'm out.
It became personal with me.
I can proudly say that Dragoon truly shined in at least one of the expansions. However, there are definitely downsides. This downside goes beyond Dragoon and to all DPS classes. The queue time. God damn, the queue time is truly something else sometimes. When I first reached the last dungeon in A Realm Reborn, I waited for like 30 minutes to be able to queue up and finish the story. This kind of immersion breaking certainly did not stop after A Realm Reborn. The same thing happened again during the end of Shadowbringer, where I was really hyped up after a cutscene, but that hype was forced back down my throat when I stood there like an idiot for 20 minutes straight. So just get ready for that when you play as Dragoon or really any other DPS class. And as a side note, Dragoon's job quest, really not the best. But it was pretty good in A Realm Reborn and in Heaven Sword, especially in A Realm Reborn, since you will get to know more about an important character and it will serve well into Heaven Sword. As for the conclusion of this video, even after so many hours, Dragoon and Dark Knight Guide coming soon, subscribe to find out, are still my two favorite classes. Subjectively, but objectively speaking on this channel, Dragoon is the coolest DPS class without a match. It may not be that easy to learn, but it will pay off with its satisfying rotations, its cool armors and weapons. Overall, don't forget to brood, leave a like or even a comment if you enjoyed the video, and peace out.